Man, you guys look fresh. Good morning to you, and welcome back to Man to Man. You know, believe it or not, guys, but today we reached the halfway mark in our manhood journey together. We're halfway home as of today. And I thought, since we're at the halfway mark, we would start by going back to session 1 and just reviewing the 5 promises that I made to you when we started this journey together, kind of to see how we're doing, because I'm a guy that likes to fulfill the promises I make, so let's just talk about them. Here are the 5 promises. First, we said in our journey that you would make some significant discoveries about yourself. Anybody have a discovery you've made over the last 5 weeks out here? I hope that you have, as you've thought about your life, looked back to your past, maybe a personal insight that you've never really dug up to consider its implications in your life, maybe something about the past and how it connects with the present, maybe something about Dad and how that key relationship, whether you knew it or not, because of what we've done, you've kind of pulled that up and realized how much of an impact, either for good or maybe a sticking point in your life, that relationship was and is. Maybe it's about how today's culture is shaping you. Maybe as we started and we talked about all the issues that are swirling around us every day, you realize, you know, in a lot of ways I really am in a manhood fog. There are things that I don't fully understand, and just being together, talking about things, is kind of opening my eyes to the world that I've been swimming in, but maybe have not been fully aware of or have appreciated like maybe I should have appreciated it. Maybe you realize there really is some gender confusion that has impacted you. Or maybe as we talked about dark manhood, you realize that there is a darkness that has been pulling you off track day to day in your life. We made the promise that in this journey that you would have some personal, significant discoveries about yourself. And I hope that ends up a very positive thing, that you use those discoveries to help move you forward in your manhood. Secondly, we said that you would receive some helpful support and insight from leaders. And I know we're fulfilling that promise because I've talked to a lot of you about your table leaders and how they've been available to you both in the table discussions and then outside the group. Some of the guys have really taken that on and have been spending some time with individual table members, just kind of helping them process life. And I think we ought to give those guys a round of applause again for their support. So again, guys, a big thank you to your table leaders, to the table leaders. And they're here for you, so as we finish this journey together, be drawing on them week to week. Thirdly, I said that you would make some new friends. And just by watching you guys around the table, because some of you just met some of the guys around the table for the first time on week 1, I know we're making some new friendships. Fourth, I promised that you would have the opportunity to better your manhood by answering the Better Manhood questions that are on your sheet from week to week. And I want to keep encouraging you to take that very seriously, not to let that just be something that's on a sheet of paper that you put aside after our sessions, but that you do take the time between the sessions to pull that question out and just for a few minutes, just to reflect on what you experienced here on Tuesday morning and ask the deeper question, how does that relate to me? Is there some adjustment, some correction, some addition that I need to make that would make me a better man? So this promise is best fulfilled not by me, I can present the material, but it's best fulfilled by you. One thing I will tell you, when we get to week 10, you're going to have that Better Man card. And you're going to take all that we've talked about for 10 weeks and reduce those down to 3 action points that when you leave here and we kind of button up this manhood experience, and now you're stepping back into the stream of everyday life, hopefully those 3 upgrades will add a tremendous energy to your manhood experience and to you as a man in this world. And then finally, I promised that you would be given a clear and practical definition of manhood that you could use. And I'm excited to be here today. I love this session because today I get to fulfill that fifth promise. Because it's time, it's time to define. And that's what we're going to do this morning. It's time to lay out a definition of manhood that I believe you can bet your masculinity on. And I think what we're going to talk about today is critical to your manhood experience, as much as anything else we've talked about. You know, about a year ago, I was doing a radio interview, and it was a lively discussion. I had a radio host, I had a sports figure there, I had a beauty queen and myself, and we were all talking about manhood in the 21st century, sharing our perspectives, and we went back and forth on all of that. But as we were finishing the interview, right before we went off the air, the host asked me this question. The host said this to me. So, Robert, what's the one essential that you think every man needs? Now think about that. How would you answer that question? What's the one essential that you think every man needs? That's really trying to distill everything down to essence. And when he asked me that question, the good news was I've been asked on other kinds of interviews a question somewhat similar to that. So I've had a chance to ponder and think about that. Yeah, what is, as I've traveled the world, what's the one essential that every man needs? So here's what I said. I said this: every man needs a working definition of his manhood to guide his life by. Let me say it again. Every man needs a working definition of his manhood to guide his life by. One that's clear, it's not foggy, it's not vague, it's clear and specific. One that can practically point his life to a place that when his life ends, it's a noble end, not a regretful end. One he can pass along to his sons. In fact, he could call his sons up to this definition. That's the essential that I find is the difference maker for every man. It's the one essential. Now that may surprise you that I said that. I mean, there are all kinds of surprises in life, big or small. I mean, not long ago I was told that it's impossible to lick your elbow. That kind of surprised me. So I tried it. It's impossible to lick your elbow, guys. Now some of you out there are going to, I don't know about that. So before the day's over, you're going to try it as well. You'll find out. It'll surprise you. Okay? There are little surprises all the time. But let me tell you one gigantic surprise. And I've had this as I've talked to guys, as I said, all over the world. And it's this. Even though we have about 4 billion men on planet Earth, it's a lot of guys. Most men, if asked this question, what is a man, could not give you an answer. Not clear, not specific. It's not something that when they say it, you can feel the energy in their gut. They kind of look at you a little bit with a blank stare. They've gone, yeah, what is a man? It's a big question. So what is a man? I hear dads all the time, and I did this as well. Growing up, your son's out playing in a game or doing some activity, and you say, come on, son, be a man. What does that mean other than be tough? See, when I've asked guys to define it for me, when we've been in an audience like this, and I say that there's just silence, and it's not golden. It's just silence. We're really not sure. Proverbs 29:18 says this, without a vision, the people wander and get out of control. Now we could genderize that to manhood and say this, without a manhood vision, men wander. They drift and they get out of control. Without a manhood clarity that's pushing us as guys every day in just little ways, because we have that core vision in our minds, without something pushing us forward, urging us to something higher and more noble, what happens to men all over the planet is that we become lost and confused. We just start guessing at our manhood, and more we guess wrong. We buy into media images of manhood that are stunted, or worse, they're empty, they're toxically selfish and sexist. That's what we drift to. That's what we wander to. And we make mistakes. And we make messes, sometimes big messes. And we hurt ourselves in doing that. And we, unfortunately, hurt a lot of other people around us. Because the truth is, here's the truth. We're wandering as men in the 21st century, and we don't even know it. But at the core of that fogginess is the manhood vision that gives clarity and direction to life. When I was a young man growing up in my early 20s, I could not tell you at all what being a man was all about. So I just assumed that I should make it up and guess at it. And you know, it wasn't a pretty sight in my 20s. There was a lot of ugliness in my life. And all that happens because we aren't sure what a real man is or what a real man is supposed to be. There is no motivating, this is it, in our life. We just guess. And you might want to write this down, because I think this is the foundation principle, which is this. For any man, it is hard to become what you cannot define. Let me say that again. It's hard to become what you cannot define. And today's lack of a working definition or a working vision of real manhood that all of society could kind of affirm, say, yeah, that's what a man is. And that men could rally around and that men could call their sons to, whether you know it or not. It's one of the principal underlying reasons that we live in so much manhood trouble today. Because we don't know what we're supposed to be. You see, every man needs a working definition that is rock solid, that he can bet his life on, and that can guide his life by whispering every day into his soul, this is who you should be. This is where you should go. This is what you should be striving after. But when you have nothing but a whiteboard with nothing on it, that becomes very difficult in the day-to-day. So here's the million-dollar question for us this morning. Where do you go to find that definition? Where do you go? Do you just make up an answer? Really, I think that's what so many millennial men are being asked to do. They're just thrown out into the high seas with white caps, and the captain yells, "Make it up!" That's what you're left to do. Do you look to culture for your answer? Of course, we're bombarded and stimulated every day with all kinds of media images, many of those about what masculinity is all about. Is that where you get your answer? Do you get it from Hollywood? The problem, of course, with culture is that cultures come and go. What was true a generation ago is not true today, or it's changed. And that's certainly true about manhood. When I was growing up in the 50s, the masculine icon that most men associated with masculinity was John Wayne. Now, some of you young guys are going, who's he? But John Wayne was this towering kind of, rugged individual, rough and tough. He never said much, didn't share, he just got the job done. That was kind of what masculinity was. It was John Wayne. But John Wayne's gone. Now we got Little Wayne. And there's a new image of masculinity. And here's what I want you to know. In 10, 15 years, we'll have another Wayne. I don't know who he's going to be, but I can promise you this. After a season of popularity, he too will be gone. And society or culture will be creating another image of manhood. When you think about that, you think, well, is there any kind of transcendent definition of manhood? One that passes through culture to culture and endures? And I think the answer is yes. And I believe the best answer for finding that definition is rooted in something much more enduring and dependable, and that is the Bible. Now, we haven't talked a lot about the Bible, but I think it's the Bible. For some of you guys who've maybe grown up in the church, you're very comfortable with the concept of looking to the Bible maybe for some answers. For others of you in the room, because I've talked to you, you know the Bible, but to you that book is still pretty much a mystery. You're not really sure what's in it. Maybe you might feel uncomfortable because of experiences you've had with religious people. But let me just tell you, the Bible is a unique book. It's one that's great to go to when we're looking for enduring answers that we can depend on. So let me just kind of brag on the Bible a little bit. You know, first of all, you need to know that book has been around for 3,500 years. That's quite a span. It has proven to be in every generation a book of helpful wisdom. It's history's all-time bestseller. This week it will be read and studied by more people on planet Earth than any other book in the world. And it's been that way, a bestseller every week for people on planet Earth for 1,000 years. 2.3 billion people who are alive today, or 31% of the world's population, will look this week, maybe even today, to the Bible for help and support in their lives. The Bible's teaching transformed the greatest ancient empire on earth, the Roman Empire. It turned this pagan empire on its head against all odds, and from that transformation established the moral, spiritual, legal, and social foundation for the building of what we call today Western civilization, of which we today in the United States draw a lot of our source of stability from. When you look at our Constitution and it starts, all men are created equal, let me tell you, our forefathers didn't pull that out of thin air. And if you read about our forefathers, there were a number of them that didn't even believe that. But it is embedded in our Constitution and has shaped our way of life. So where did they get that concept? They got it from the Bible. When we pledge allegiance to the flag and say one nation under God, that didn't come from just nowhere. That came from somewhere. That came from the Bible. It would not be an overstatement to say this about the Bible. It is history's greatest source of enduring wisdom for all walks of life. We're going to talk about that more in a few weeks. But it addresses all walks of life. And here's what's interesting. It addresses very clearly manhood. In fact, the Bible actually begins when you open the very first pages of the Bible to Genesis 1 and 2. You know where the spotlight goes? It goes to manhood. Right there in the opening chapters. Did you know that? In these opening 2 chapters, God introduces and instructs the first man on planet Earth, Adam, in what being a man is all about. That's what those opening 2 chapters addresses. And as he does that, we get to see what I call the 4 defining marks of real manhood that God wants this first man to embrace, but not just the first man. He's just the prototype. All men for all of history to embrace. This is an enduring, transcendent definition of manhood that we're about to step into today, guys. Adam's just simply the first application. And after he gives these this kind of defining marks of manhood to Adam, as you go through the rest of the Bible, these marks will be brought up again and again to the future generations, and so on and so forth, passed on to the fact that now it flows into this room today. So now listen, and this is important before we go on. Embracing and living out these 4 marks, these 4 characteristics that I'm about to talk to you about, has always been and always will be how boys become men. And we won't do it perfectly. No man does it perfectly. We've talked about that. We men have clay feet. But if you have a vision, here's what you know. If you give attention to the vision every day, you may not do it perfectly, but here's what you know. You're climbing up to a more noble manhood rather than being pulled down by a culture that knows nothing about what real manhood is about. One thing is for sure. The guy who's out there in America today, driving around the streets of our city today, who doesn't embrace the things we're going to talk about, or even who rejects them, no matter what he looks like on the outside, I can tell you as a man who spent a lot of time talking to men about their lives, and I know the inside, he will be more boy than man, no matter how he looks to you. And it will have an impact that's negative on his life. So that's what we want to do. We want to take just a moment with your outlines, and we want to examine what I call the 4 defining marks of real manhood. Here's what we want to start with, and it's the most important one. It'll sound a little religious, so hang with me. But here's what it is. A real man will surrender to God and His Word. He will surrender to God and His Word. And this first mark shows up as you open the pages of the Bible in Genesis when God has first created Adam, and Adam is actually awakening from his createdness in this new environment called the Garden of Eden. And as he comes conscious, he's immediately confronted with God, who begins to talk to him about what his manhood should be all about. And as I've read that story hundreds of times, one of the first things that jumps out at me from these pages is God's trying to get something across to Adam that's foundational for his life, and it has to do with how Adam responds to God Himself and His Word. Now, actually, have changed how I address this first mark. I used to say a real man believes God and His Word. Okay? I just put it down there as I read the story. But, that doesn't quite get me there to what I think is actually occurring here in the garden. Believe it's not quite strong enough. And I say that from my experience with men, because I know a lot of men who believe and go to church, but their life is not manly. Their life, in fact, is maybe stunted or troubled or stuck. And when you go back and look at what God says to Adam at the very beginning, God is really pushing Adam to a stronger kind of belief. And so I looked for a word that would express that stronger kind of belief, and I came up with the word surrender, because surrender is belief. If you surrender something, you believe in it. But here's what it is. It's belief with teeth in it. It can growl. It bites into life. It doesn't just go to church. It doesn't just lean on, these little innuendos, phrases, catchphrases that it doesn't really pursue. Surrender is something that really believes this. It goes after things. It obeys. It fights. It follows. That's the kind of belief that God is trying to get across right at the beginning to Adam after He's created him. He wants Adam to believe. But He wants Adam to believe with teeth. He wants him to bite into life with the truth that He's about to give him. So let's look at this first mark here in Genesis chapter 2. Here's what God says to Adam. And he's just becoming conscious now. And God says to Adam, "From any tree of the garden you may eat freely. But from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, lest you die." Now this is a story, but radiating out of that are these principles. And even as you read this passage, what you can feel is God is not asking Adam just to acknowledge the reality of the garden. He's wanting Adam to bite into the reality of the garden, because there can be freedom in the garden or there can be death. So you're going to have to surrender to one or the other. That's what He's asking him to do. Let me make 2 other little observations about this moment. First, notice with me that here as God's setting up planet Earth with all the creatures on planet Earth, it was only man of all the created world that needed coaching. Every other creature was set up with a fixed internal script that I call instinct. So when God created, for instance, a bird, that bird already had its internal script. Nothing else was added. The bird just went off to be a bird. Same with the squirrel or a fish or an elephant or whatever. Only man, when he was finally created, needed something more than instinct to be fully human. God did not want us to trust our instinct only. What man needed was God's instruction. He needed God's input and counsel. Man needed to know that he was created with a head coach in mind and a playbook, and if he played by those rules, life was a gift to him. But if he ignored them and decided to be something other than fully man, he would have problems, and he would not live the way He intended or wanted to with the results. Secondly, I want you to notice what God actually says in this passage. He outlines for Adam where his personal freedom was. He told Adam, he said, enjoy the garden. It's like a buffet. You do what you want to do. Make your own decisions. I've provided for you a space of freedom where you can make your own choices. So that's being provided. God sets up your life the same way, where you have a lot of personal freedom. But God also says that you need to be careful with how you use that freedom, because there are a few things in this environment that you need to surrender your freedom to. And that's important that you hear that. For Adam, it was in the beginning one thing. Yield to my instruction so that you won't take on this tree that has the knowledge of good and evil in it. Now here's the point, guys. Because we men are given this freedom. If you're a real man, if you really understand life, you get that. You get that God is providing you freedom, and even though He gives instruction to be safeguards to that freedom, it's not to take away your freedom. It's actually to enhance and protect your freedom that you'll give up if you want to act like a boy. That's what He's trying to give Adam at this moment. To me, a great illustration of that is taking your grandkids bowling. Have you ever done that? Some of you? You take your grandkids bowling. Of course, you go to the bowling alley, and they can hardly pick up the ball, first of all. But you, if you're smart as a granddad, you get the manager of the alley to put up what? Guardrails. Now, why are those guardrails there? It's because when your grandson or granddaughter go and they drop the ball and almost break the wood in front of them, and the ball rolls down, sometimes that ball will actually stay in the lane and knock down some pins. But they're guaranteed a good experience with the guardrails. Because even if the ball wanders, what would normally be going into the guardrails push the ball back out, and so you have a good experience. Right? Look at me. That's how life is lived. Because every once in a while, I'll have my grandson or my granddaughter say, Granddaddy, put down the guardrails. Get them to do that. When we put the guardrails down, we don't have fun anymore. They get frustrated. They start whining and complaining as their ball ends up in the gutter again and again and again. And listen, real men get that. They understand that principle. When the guardrails of life are up and you appreciate that, all that's in front of you is freedom. But when the guardrails are down, there's pain. And there's frustration. And there's death. That's the rule of life. I serve on the board of directors of a treatment center for drug and alcohol addiction, which has been a good experience for me, kind of an eye-opening experience. Not long ago, I was attending as a guest a AA meeting, a 12-step program. And actually, that's something, by the way, I wish every man could do. It'd be great to just sit in as a guest in an AA meeting. But here's what you see immediately. People in AA, they know death. Because addiction is death. People in AA know what it's like to lose their freedom. Because addiction is slavery. But that's a great picture of life. On this particular night when I was there, there were two men. They were sharing around some of the steps of recovery. And there were two middle-aged guys, both of them as they introduced themselves. They were church-going men. And part of their testimony was that, they had gone through cycles of alcohol abuse and tried to suck it up and get on top of that and make it work. And then they would crash and burn and hurt their families and hurt themselves and go back through a cycle again and again. That was both of them testimony. But then one guy said, but let me tell you the good news. Because of this organization where I've been sober now for 10 years. Another guy said, I've been sober for 7 years. And they were sharing all of that around that evening, step 3 of the 12 steps. And they said this was the difference maker for both of us. And here's what step 3 actually says. This is in AA. we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God. In other words, they said, up until we really came to terms with step 3, we just kept trying to suck it up and make it work, and that didn't work. But at some point, we finally realized life is bigger than us, tougher than us, stronger than us, and it controls us. And in this case, it was around drugs and alcohol, and it was destroying us. But when we finally said, I can't do it, and I turned my will and my life over to the care of God, when I finally surrendered, that's when I began to recover. That's what real men know. They know that turning life over to God is the step to really being a man. It was the difference maker. It's where real freedom is, and it's where real manhood is. So, this first mark of real manhood for our working definition is just simply this. And it's one that it's so powerful, there's no way this audience is going to fully digest it here this morning. I just want you to hear it. It's a tall Mount Everest that we're always trying to climb to, and that's this. Real men surrender to God and His Word. And if you hadn't understood that yet, life will keep bringing that issue up again and again and asking you to believe, but to go further than just believe, to believe with teeth. And it's called surrender. Here's the second mark of real manhood. It's a real man loves and protects God's woman. And this principle is illustrated really in the marriage of Adam and Eve. Here's what it says in Genesis 2:22. It says, the Lord fashioned into a woman the rib which He had taken from the man. Here's the key phrase, and He brought her to the man. Now remember we talked about Western civilization? Did you know, for you guys who are married, you know the tradition where you're standing down front in the church or wherever the chapel or wherever you got married with the presiding official, and then there comes that grand moment where the door is open in the back and the bride is standing there with her dad, and she comes down the aisle with Dad, and Dad hands her off to you. You know where you got that? You know why we've been doing that for thousands of years? There's the verse. God the Father creates Eve, His daughter, and ushers that daughter down and presents that daughter to His son, Adam. And they're joined as husband and wife. Now let me tell you, I've been down front when that's occurred over and over again because I preside in a lot of those weddings. And there's an unspoken message every time I'm standing there. Because I see those doors open and I see the bride coming with her dad, and I can see the dad kind of tight-lipped a little bit as he comes down front. And when he passes his daughter off to this young man, you don't have to hear anything, but you can feel it. Here's what he's saying. Son, you better love and protect my daughter. That's a powerful message. Because he's giving up something that is incredibly valuable in his life, that he's invested years and years in, and he's giving it away to this guy who he's hoping he won't live like the animals by instinct. But he'll live by something higher and nobler that'll make him a man who can care and protect his daughter. You know, Genesis, if you read the story, if you know the story, you discover that Adam ultimately failed in that assignment. Remember, Adam was created before Eve. That's what we learn here. And he was given instruction about the garden early on, so as not that Eve couldn't understand that same information, but by giving Adam that instruction about the rules of the garden first before Eve was created, he was helping Adam understand to understand it's your responsibility to watch out for your wife. And of course, in the story, Adam doesn't do that. His wife is tempted, she falls, he falls, the human race falls into the sin of death and pain. But what's interesting is when God comes for an accounting of the event, and He looks at what took place, even though Eve took the fruit first, Eve is never blamed for that transgression. Adam is at fault. And you know why Adam is at fault? Because God was speaking a message into the human race about what manhood is. Manhood is about taking responsibility for making sure these directions that God has set forth are established in every home. And if they aren't, God doesn't call the woman to account. He calls the man to account. Thousands of years later, as you go through history and then you come to a place in a Roman city called Ephesus, and Paul is trying to teach young men, probably had a gathering, probably not this big, where he's teaching young men on marriage. He starts giving some thoughts, some wisdom about how to live with your wife. And basically, here's what Paul says in Ephesians 5. He tells husbands, these young men, to love their wives as Christ loved the church. In other words, connect with your wife from your heart and be a sacrificial leader who attends to her needs and watches out for her. He says, so love her. And then he says, and protect her with the Word of God. Those are the two statements in this kind of priority passage on marriage in the New Testament. Love and protect. That's what real manhood is all about when it comes to women. This is real manhood stuff. And by the way, even if you're not married here today, maybe you're just dating someone, love and protect is how you should have been launched by Dad out of your home. So when you first started dating that young lady in junior high or high school or college, you're not there to make her another casualty of the Me Too movement. You're there to honor this person who is fully in the image of God and needs to be treated with dignity and respect. And you, the man, have been charged by God from the beginning of time to watch out for her, not take advantage of her. That's what's good about teaching sons when they're young, treating mom with dignity and respect, opening the door for mom, helping clean up after dinner with mom, watching out for mom, so that a young man is being ingrained from the very beginning that when men engage women, no matter where they are or at what level, their radar is up. I'm here to be a man. And my role is to love and protect the women who are around me. Real men love and protect God's woman. Thirdly, a third mark is that a real man excels at God's work. At God's work. Genesis 2:15 says this, Then the Lord God took the man and put him into the Garden of Eden to work it and watch over it. Now this is before the fall, this is before any other event, but the very first thing you learn about work is that work is sacred. It's not just a job. There is no work that's just a job. And right here in the beginning, work was something that was sacred. It was a calling of God. It was God who took Adam and gave him this vocation and said, make this place beautiful. And if you do a good job here, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to give you the whole earth to do this with. You know, today we don't use the word vocation very much. But vocation has a Latin root from the word vocal or calling. And it was to give us an understanding that all work is sacred. All work has a calling behind it from a Creator God who wants you to be the best you can be in your workplace. And this is what is actually taking place here in Genesis. God is calling the man to excel at his work. And for most of Western civilization, work had that sacredness to it. I'm afraid we're losing some of that, but for most of history, work was not just something that's going to feed me. It's something that I can do both to feed me, but also to bless others. When I was in Paris one day on vacation with my wife, we went to the great museum, the Louvre, there in Paris. If you ever had the opportunity to do that, it's a magnificent experience. But on this particular day that we were there, our guide said, hey, we have something special we'd like to show you. We'd like to show you the original foundations of the castle on which the Louvre is now built, because they're doing archaeological work down there. So we went down in this kind of dark hallway till we were there kind of at bedrock, and there were some archaeologists digging and sifting through rocks, and she pointed out to us really these foundation stones for this great tower that was there. Now all that was left were just the foundation stones. And they're like what you see around Little Rock, the footings, so to speak, that once you lay them, you cover them over and nobody ever sees them again. And she just simply asked us to step forward and look at these stones. So we did. And of course, with my great discerning eye, all I saw was a pile of rocks. And she said, no, I want you to look at the stones. Look how perfectly fitted they are. No mortar was required. So you got close, and sure enough, all these foundation stones were cut in these perfect squares. They were butted up against one another. You couldn't even hardly put a hair between them. And then she said, I want you to get a little closer and notice something else. So we got a little closer, and she says, look at the fact that on every stone, the stonemason has put a cross. Even though he knew after his work was done, it would be covered up, no one would ever see it. But for those stonemasons at this period of time who were building this building, they weren't just building a building. They were worshiping God. And they wanted everything that they did to reflect that priority in their work. You see, a real man, he honors God at his work and he excels in his work because he knows it's more than just a job. It's a calling. And then lastly, fourth, in Genesis. These are only four things. These are the four interactions with God, with Adam, that mark his manhood. The last mark is that real men better God's world. Here's the way it's said in Genesis 1:28. It says, and God blessed the man and the woman and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. Now, look at the verse, guys, and tell me, how does God intend Adam to better God's world? And here's the answer. The answer is by being a better dad. That's what this verse is saying. Notice he's saying to Adam and Eve, I want you to be fruitful. I want you to have kids. But I want those kids to be shaped in such a way, emotionally, spiritually, socially, intellectually, that they can go out, because this is not how you're going to do it, that they will be able to go out and subdue the world. And the word subdued there in the Hebrew is talking about making the world better, bringing it under control, bringing glory to it. And Adam's being challenged right here to do that. And the vehicle that does that is by raising healthy, stable, next generation kids. And a man's contribution to that is absolutely critical, as we learned last week. So sad that over 40% of kids today growing up in America don't even have dad on the premises. And a large percentage who do, dad's not available. He's absent, AWOL. And yet, at the very beginning of real manhood, is that at the base of real manhood is a primary mark of fatherhood. Fatherhood that would encourage and strengthen and stabilize and give weight to. Remember weight? And give weight to a young man growing up so he or his sister could be difference makers in the next generation. So guys, here's what we've done. We just asked the question, what's the working definition of manhood? A real man has these four marks over his life. Not perfectly. There is no perfect man. Remember, guys? No perfect guy. But this is the mountain we're being called to. And if you wanted to be able to say to a dad when he says to his son, be a man, son, and you say, what do you mean by that? Here's what I hope he would say. He would turn back and say, well, let me tell you what a man is. A man is somebody who surrenders to God and His Word. A real man is somebody who loves and protects a woman. He excels at his work. And he betters this world. That's what a man is. Last month we celebrated Martin Luther King Day. And I always like when we go through Martin Luther King Day because we get that image of Martin Luther King in Washington giving the famous speech, I have a dream. You know what he was trying to do? He was trying to give vision to a nation to rearrange its energies and its everyday conversations to something that would encourage the next generation to be focused on racial equality and social justice. That's what vision does. It keeps you from wandering in those things and crystallizes a better future. I have a dream. Not maybe that big, but I have a dream. Here's my dream. Is that in churches across America and in homes across America, rather than just vaguely telling your son to be a man, or yourself wandering around in a manhood fog, we would have a consensus of what a man is and should be. We would be able to articulate from our pulpits what manhood is about. You guys around just everyday life would every once in a while bring up a definition like this, because I think this is the biblical definition, and encourage one another with it. Dads would be calling their sons to this so that the energies of American masculinity could be focused on a vision that would pull men up to be better than they are, rather than have the culture sink them into the mire and muck of secularism that's destroying their masculinity. I have a dream that you would know what a man is. Now let me just give, as we finish, some practical implications of a definition like that, and you'll see how this works in everyday life. I want to give you 6 brief implications of a clear definition of masculinity. Here's the first. When you have a definition like this is a manhood that every man can aspire to. See, manhood in most cultures gets reduced to how you look, what kind of athletic ability you have, what kind of power you possess, how much money you make. And if manhood becomes those stunted images, here's what happens to an audience like this. Some of us are manhood winners, and the rest of us are manhood losers. Because not everybody's going to be good looking, scores 35 points a game, runs a company or whatever. But this definition I gave you is a manhood that every man in the room can aspire to, because every man can listen to God. Every man can protect the woman in his life and love her. Every man, regardless of what his vocation is, can do better at his job, not because he has to, because the employer wants him to, but because he wants to respond that way to please the God that he loves. And every man can love his kids and build into his life. This is a manhood that every man can aspire to. Secondly, this is a manhood that can serve as one's life compass. Because that's what vision does. It gives you direction. You get to ask this question, am I headed in the right direction? And let me tell you, the definition I just gave you today, let me show you how practical it is. You can be driving in your car next week down the street, and you can ask yourself this question: how am I doing as a man? And if you know this definition, this high-speed computer can run through those 4 things and immediately give you an answer. Just like the dashboard of your car. Let's say there's 4 lights, and you go, as you're riding down the street, how am I doing as a man? And those lights will light up, and the ones that light up green mean you're doing pretty good. Yeah, I'm doing pretty good with my wife. I'm doing pretty good with my job. But then you look down at the end, and this last light is blinking red. It's about fatherhood. And you immediately go, yeah, I haven't spent any time with Bobby. I keep talking about we're going to do some special experience together, but the year's going by and I haven't done it. So it gives you immediately a way to recalibrate your masculinity around those 4 marks and balance your life again. Because the goal of life for us men, at the very end, is to finish life with all 4 lights on green. Now, unfortunately, most guys live by what I call a mono-masculinity, and that is they give all their attention to their job. I can't tell you how many guys I've met who go out and give all their attention so they can excel and make money and have the things that they want, and they all say the same thing when they're 60 years old. I regret mono-masculinity. Because masculinity is not mono, it's quadraphonic. It's trying to keep every day these 4 marks of masculinity healthy and making the 1,000 little adjustments that will go on every month in such a way that when you finish life and you look back on your life, all the lights, the job may not have been as successful as you could have made it if you gave everything in your life to it. But you didn't. You took some of that energy and gave it over here to your kids and a little bit over here to your wife. And you calibrate it in such a way that at the end of your life, you're looking back and here's what you'll say. I'm glad I did that. I'm glad I did that. This is a manhood that can serve as your life compass, just keeping you on course with all that's coming at you every day. Thirdly, this is a manhood that women long for. Because let me tell you, women today long for somebody who's going to value them and love them, but they also value the man who will keep them safe. Regardless of what's said today, women want to feel safe around a man. That's what's being cried out from our culture every day through the women's movement. Do you care about me, or do you just want to use me? Remember the radio program I told you about that we started the session with today? When we finished that radio interview and everybody was taking off their headsets and we were about to leave the room, the beauty queen that was in the room giving her statements, she leaned over to me as we were walking out and she said, "Hey, could you find me a guy like you were talking about today?" You know why? Because this is a manhood women long for. Fourth, this is a manhood dads can confidently call their sons to. Rather than just saying, be a man, you can tell your sons, let me tell you what being a man is all about. Remember the sheet we gave about the smart dad? It's such a wonderful thing to introduce your son, for instance, to what manhood really is when they're about 12 or 13, and then begin to have conversations about that through life. I mentioned to you that my sons wear this gold ring with their wedding ring. This is the manhood ring. This is the wedding ring. But this reminds them of what they're trying to do in life. Reminds me. I put it on every morning, and it's just a silent whisper. Just like this is a silent whisper. You gave your life away to this woman. You're not going to give it to anyone else. This reminds me. This is where you're going in life. This is what you're trying to accomplish. This is how you can call your sons up. Because you don't just have a phrase, be a man. You have specifics to tell your son what being a man is all about. Fifth, this is a manhood that history affirms. History actually affirms what I just told you. From other cultures of the world, former Secretary of Education Bill Bennett wrote a book on manhood through the ages around cultures. And he found that as you look at different cultures all around the world, if you really distill what they're saying about men, it keeps coming back, and this is what got my attention, to four things. This is what Bennett said. I'm going to quote him. He says this, "History has repeatedly described manhood in terms of success in four domains. They are religion, family, work, and community." Does that sound familiar? Surrender to God and His Word, that's religion. Family, love and protect your woman. Build into these kids. Work, excel at God's work. Community, be a difference maker. History reinforces what God originally declared manhood was all about. It's this enduring wisdom. And finally, this is a manhood that promises reward, guys. That promises reward. From the beginning, freedom was promised to Adam for surrendering to God and His Word. You're going to have a lot of choices you can make, and God has provided you that freedom to innovate and be an entrepreneur and be creative and all those kind of things. But there are guardrails. But those guardrails just enhance your freedom. And that's what was told originally to Adam. But if we could fast forward thousands of years when Jesus was walking with His disciples, Jesus turned to His disciples and He said the same thing about their manhood. Here's how He said it. Men, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. That's how you're going to really be free. That's the reward of surrender. Secondly, deep, intimate companionship is promised for loving and protecting God's woman. There's no human relationship on planet Earth that is as close, that is as satisfying, and as energizing as when you are joined heart, soul, mind, and body to a woman over time, if you cultivate it well. The Bible actually calls it, it's so close, the Bible uses the term oneness. There's no other relationship that you can have oneness, but that has to be cultivated. It doesn't just happen. But if you cultivate it, that's the reward of loving and protecting a woman, is you'll find this deep companionship that'll carry you through life. Inheritance is promised for excelling at God's work. It's not just about getting a paycheck. If you look in the Scriptures, what you begin to understand is what Scripture says work does is it brings you, here, look at me guys, it brings you a name. When you walk by a bunch of guys and they see you walk by a guy who excels his work, after you walk by, they turn and they go, that guy's unbelievable at carpentry. That's one of the best engineers in the city. This guy can coach like no other because he doesn't just coach athletics, he builds young boys and young girls in their character. They talk about you when you walk by. You have a name. You have influence. Over time, because of your skills, you use those skills not just at your work, but you bless the community, maybe the world with them. Young men and young women come to you for advice because you're good at what you do. And the Bible calls that in Colossians. It says, do your work in Colossians 3. Do your work heartily as unto the Lord and not as unto men. It's the Lord Christ whom you serve, and you will receive this reward. That's your reward for being good at work, not just a paycheck. And then lastly, joy is promised to men who better God's world through their children. In 3 John it says this, I have no greater joy than this, than to see my children walking in the truth. And I can tell you, guys, as an older man, I have no greater joy in my life than to see my kids doing well, not in what they do, but in who they are. I started this message, and I'm going to close it with this, with a question. The question the DJ asked me was, what's the one essential that every man needs? And I said, a working definition of manhood to guide his life by. Now let me ask you a question as we finish. How's your manhood doing? How's it doing? Do you have a manhood clearly defined in your mind? Do you have a vision, kind of a North Star that's guiding you forward in life? It's so critical to your overall masculine health. And you already know my goal here today is to convince you that you need that. Because if you have that in your heart, you've embraced it, what it's going to do, it's going to constantly encourage you to turn to God when you're out of answers. And that's a good thing. It's going to constantly remind you to love and protect the woman that's around you and not just settle into a routine where you don't think about her anymore. You just expect things from her. But you're constantly investing because you know that's my job. That's part of my masculinity to encourage this relationship. It will motivate you to excel at your work, not just to make money, but to make a difference. And it will remind you that you're here to make the world a better place by launching into the next civilization, civilized, God-honoring sons and daughters. This is what real manhood does. It's defined. And because it's defined, it energizes and it clarifies. And it constantly says in just little whispers in your heart, every day as you face the issues that come at you, it says this, manhood is this way. It keeps telling you where to go. But you're going to have to do 3 things, and I close with these 3 things, just for you to consider, to receive the benefits of this definition. First, you're going to have to believe this is truly the manhood script God is calling you as a man to follow. And for some of you, I know this is totally out of the blue, and you're going, I don't know about all this. Well, this week, go look at Genesis, look at it, and ask yourself, where do I go to find what manhood's all about? And you can review the passages and everything I told you. I think what you're going to see is you really hover over these texts. You're going to see, yeah, what Robert was talking about, he didn't just make that up. That really is in there. This is what Scripture declares, and I believe that that's what it does. But for it to be your belief about manhood, you've got to choose to believe it, not because I said it. Secondly, you will need to go beyond belief to what I call buy-in. Buy-in. Because buy-in puts this definition to work. It doesn't just stand there and go, yeah, what he said today was really good. Buy-in puts the definition to work. It's where you use it to guide your life by it, to direct your life by it, to measure your life by it, to correct your life by it, to balance your life by it, because it's quadraphonic. you buy into it. And guys, everybody look at me for just a second. Buy-in is a big decision. Belief is a big acknowledgement. But buy-in is a big decision because when you buy in, you say, I'm going to give my life to this. I really am. And then finally, you will need to work and struggle to become this definition. Real manhood, I hope you feel this. Some of you probably do feel this. It's not easy. Real manhood is a challenge, but that's what our masculinity is all about. It's about the challenge to conquer and to perform. And real manhood is a difficult journey, but it is such a good journey, especially when you know where you're going. And if you struggle to become what I've just talked about, and you do it persistently with determination and faith, here's what I want you to know. Over time, what we've just talked about, this definition, more and more of these characteristics will arise in your life over the years. And you won't just be talking about a definition of manhood. Everybody, this is important. You won't just be talking about this definition. Your sons and your daughters and your wife and your friends and your community will look at you, and you are the definition. You are the definition. And that makes a huge impact everywhere you go. You become the life-giving man that we talked about in session 1, and that life-giving manhood works. Over time, you will give life to yourself, life to your wife. You will empower and bless your sons and daughters. You will elevate your work, and you will bring glory to God. And I really believe that at the end of life, when it's all over, rather than looking back with regret, you will look back over the landscape of your life, and here's what you'll be. You'll be rich in life, and you'll be glad. Because real manhood makes you glad. But you got to believe it, you got to buy into it, and then you got to struggle and fight to become it. That's the path. And that's the path we're going to define in more detail in the weeks ahead. You guys have a great week.